Welcome to another episode of the SNA Speakeasy. Today is our second event with a guest who's based in Singapore, and it's actually somewhat similar to the first time, which we also talked about the COVID-19 crisis. But earlier on in the COVID-19 crisis, Singapore was seen as kind of perhaps a global model of a success story, a country which acted very proactively against the first infections and seemed to have everything under control. But then an explosion happened, and what exactly happened with regard to that, and the reasons for that, and is part of what we'll be discussing today. Our guest is Mr. PN Balji, and why don't you kind of describe who you are and what kind of career that you've had?
Okay, I think I should start with my age first.
Okay.
Before I begin, Michael, you can call me Balji. Don't make it so formal. No need to use the honorific. Thank you very much. And so I'm 72 years old. I've been a journalist for nearly 40 plus years. And I don't practice journalism now on a full-time basis, but I am more a freelance. I do freelance for a number of publications. And some people ask me, what do you do now? I said, I am now of nuisance value. So I've been in journalism for about 40 plus years. I worked in 5 newspapers. Of the 5, I edited 3 of them. And I was also the founding editor of news website. Yeah, and I just wrote 1 year ago. I finished a book called Reluctant Editor. Very short.
And just to not get too much into it, what made you reluctant as an editor?
Oh, okay. Reluctant Editor because my editor-in-chief wanted me to take over from him when he was leaving in 1990, and I was reluctant. I was reluctant because I had a medical scare, and I said, no, I don't want to do it. And then he tried to persuade me over a long lunch. I was still not convinced, and I said, look, I will go and talk to my wife. If she says yes, I will do it. I spoke to her. She took 3 days. She came back and said, okay, I think you should accept the job. And I was happy because then she cannot complain if I don't spend enough time with the family, because she is the one who told me to take the job.
That's a very good strategy, and we can already see the clever mind that you're displaying there.
Okay.
Well, all right. So today's topic is about the migrant workers and the COVID-19 issue in Singapore. So, a lot of the people who are going to be watching this video are people who are generally not in Singapore. They haven't been following the Singapore news very carefully. So, for what might be common knowledge to you and your neighbors is not common knowledge to us. So, kind of take it with that perspective when you
Yeah. So
talk to
what
us.
what you're basically telling me is I should talk about this subject like the way I would talk to my 11-year-old grandson.
Exactly. That's right.
Okay. But
Or
I won't dump it. But I won't dump it down.
okay, good. But so yes, so, or as you would to a golden retriever, right?
Yeah.
All right. So basically, as I said in the introduction, Singapore for some weeks was being considered to be like one of the very successful cases in controlling COVID-19. But
Mhm.
then something happened. So can you tell us what happened that
Okay.
allowed things to spiral out of control?
You're absolutely right. When we started tackling this crisis, which was about in late February, early March, uh, the government, which had, I mean, Singapore, which had about 1.5 million, I don't call them migrant workers, I call them guest workers. Because when you use the term guest workers, then that's the way we should treat them, people who are guests to our country. So guest workers, I think, is a better form of expression.
Mm.
So we have nearly 1.5 million or slightly more guest workers in Singapore.
Out of what
Our,
kind of
to-
population?
our population is about 5 million or slightly more than 5 million. So that's quite a huge figure, you know. And and it was, as you rightly said, the word is explosion, you know. This was a problem that was waiting to explode, mainly because most of them are in dormitories built by their employers, and they are extremely crowded, and to a certain extent, unsanitary living conditions. And I think to put it in very, very plain terms, the government dropped the ball on this, in the sense that they didn't see this crisis coming from the dormitories. And this is a very unusual thing in Singapore, because Singapore is well known to be very to think through things, to plan for things. You know, it's a society that anticipates issues, anticipates problems. But in this case, they dropped the ball, and as a result, the virus spread in the dormitories extremely fast, and the government had to take some very drastic measures, drastic in the sense that they have to take these people out, put them in different locations, give them accommodation, which I'm sure has cost the government a lot of money. And if you look at our daily cases, COVID cases, we have about, I think today it was about 235 per day, new cases, and 90% of them are foreign workers, which then means if we had tackled the case earlier, I think we would not have the kind of lockdown that we have had now. I would not have been in my home, which became a jail, which became a cell, for the last nearly 3 months.
Yes.
90% of the cases are foreign workers. I mean, guest workers.
Well, as you say, you know, in Japan today, I think we have something like 60 or 70 cases out of a population of
Exactly.
120 million, right? So, and other countries like have done even better. Of course, some worse as well. Well, let's back up a little bit. You say that there are about 1.5 guest workers in Singapore. Where are these guests from? Generally speaking, what nationalities are they?
Yeah, good. They are mainly from the region, that is Malaysia, to some extent Thailand, Myanmar, but mainly from Malaysia. And in the construction sector, most of them come from India and Bangladesh.
And so, why are they there? So, I mean, Singapore is a rich country. So, why does it need so many guest workers? What kind of functions are they playing?
Very, very simple, because the Singaporean doesn't want to do the jobs that the guest workers are doing. Either it's too hard for them. We are becoming a very, very soft society, or they think these jobs are menial jobs. It's not something I should do. We are a first world society. And third, I think the pay is very low. The employers are not prepared to pay them the kind of salaries that they are looking for. So there's no choice, because construction is a very, very important part of our economy, and we need workers. We are building flats, we are building the terminal building. We are supposed to build a 5th terminal building. So there is a building buzz kind of every day. So we need these workers, you know. But whether we treat them well, I mean, that's a big question. I think we can treat them better. And they come here because for them it's good money. Right? $1 Singapore dollar is worth about 50 rupees in India. But they also come here paying a lot of money to the agents in India, So they need the jobs. They have to settle their loans.
Um, Aside from the COVID-19 crisis, is the government sort of regulation of these workers and the policies for their welfare generally well done, or was this kind of COVID-19 mistake something that kind of reflects very clearly the lack of a good policy making that has been made on their behalf?
Yeah, okay. That's a very good question because I think the Singapore government could have done much better in the way these people were treated by by their employers. Many years ago, when I was editor of the new paper, we had a very good, I won't call it a good story, we had a story about how an employer a Bangladeshi worker who was hurt very badly, he actually got his henchman to dump the worker in a drain, left there to die. But somehow somebody found him in the drain and sent him back to Bangladesh. So I'm talking about many years ago. I don't think it happens now, but the attitude towards these foreign workers has really not changed. I don't think they get a good deal, and the government is not really pushing the employers hard enough to give them a better deal. Better deal not just in salaries, living conditions, as we have now seen in the dormitories, for example. I think the dormitories are there. The government is now committed publicly to building more dormitories with better sanitary conditions. So I think that part of it is changing.
Well, let's touch on the dormitories because suddenly Singapore dormitories have become world famous as a result of this this incident. So, can you kind of take us through? Is it just a bunch of people? How many people are living in one room? What's the general
Okay.
situation? Where are they? What's the general setup for
They,
these dormitories?
they are built in more the outlying areas. Some of them are built where their workplaces are, near their workplaces. And I think in a room, in a bedroom, for example, you would see about, or maybe two bedrooms together, you would see about 10 to 12 people. And there have been enough pictures that came out in the media, which really shocked Singaporeans, to see, my God, I never realized this. Right? So that's one part. The second part, which I think nobody has really looked deeper into, is that the public know their contribution, but they don't want to hear about them. They don't want to see them because Singapore is such a property crazy country. So they don't want these workers, their dormitories, near my house. There's a famous thing called "not in my backyard."
Mm.
And in 2011, there were plans to build a dormitory near a private housing estate, and there was a major backlash. And that constituency, which is Serangoon Gardens, lost that election to the ruling party. I mean, the ruling party lost that constituency in that year. So you can see how. The reason why I mentioned this is not just the government to be blamed. I think the public is also to be blamed.
Mm.
And most important, we are a first world society, purely on economic terms.
Right. So, generally, who owns these dormitories? Are they run by companies? Are they run by private landowners who are
Yeah.
kind of getting rent from these people?
The dormitories are all built by employers who employ these workers, and they are built on state land. So I think state leases it to them, and they build these dormitories there.
And what kind of responsibility do the employers have to make sure that their workers are getting the correct services?
I think the government has, in the last couple of months, the government has released statistics to show that many of these employers or the owners of these dormitories or the people who build these dormitories and run these dormitories have been taken to task for not meeting conditions that the government has set. But having said that, I doubt whether the policing by the government is strict enough because these incidents keep cropping up.
Okay, so this might have been the situation up until this became the overwhelming news item of Singapore. So in the last weeks and months since this has been revealed, how much of a shift in consciousness or in politics have you been feeling about this?
Among the public?
Both the government and the public.
Okay, let me start with the government. I think the government has suddenly realized that they have to tackle this problem. So they have, as I said, they have already decided to build new factories. They are coming up with new regulations on how many people should live in one room. And thirdly, they have, because I wrote an article a couple of months ago to say this is a stain Singapore can do without. And I think the government realized that and has been engaged quite in a diplomatic sense with the foreign governments whose workers are in Singapore. So I think they are serious about it. The public, whether there has been a shift, I have my doubts. I have not done any surveys. I have my doubts because the fundamental issue is, will my property price go down? And property is a big issue in Singapore. You know that Singaporeans are property owners. They live in properties that they own. 90% or maybe more than 90% live in their own homes. 80% are built by government are in government flats. And they're all they are not in the sense that this is a home for them, but this is a house. And they're all trying to see how much I can get by selling the house and then moving on to something else. So there is this, and I call it, the property business is a gamble. People are going in there to gamble. So it is a big money-making machine for a lot of people. When people come to my house, my home, one of the first questions they ask is, so how much does this property cost? So it's a money game, So I doubt that the public would have changed its mind or will change its mind in the near future.
You mentioned foreign governments. Have they gotten involved in this question at all? I mean, since it was revealed that these people are living in these poor conditions and the COVID-19 spread through the dormitories, have, for example, the Malaysian government or the Bangladeshi government or the Indian government, anybody jumped in and could have asked for things to be improved?
Yeah, that's a good question. But as far as I know, from what I've seen, what I've read, my discussions with people, no. And I think there are two reasons, because they themselves have major problems with migrant workers, guest workers. Malaysia has a huge migrant population, mainly from Indonesia, and they have. The second reason is that they are plate full tackling COVID. So I don't think they have really made a big fuss, because if they make a big fuss, we would see them in the foreign newspapers, which we have not seen. They are preoccupied about their own countries and the problems that they are facing.
Well, if we call them migrants or guests, how long is an individual generally staying in Singapore before they move on? How strict are the time limits that they have in the country?
Yeah, normally they are given work permits. There are different types of work permits, so I won't confuse the issue. Permits to work here, and the permits last about 2 years, which can be renewed. I know people who have been here, these guest workers have been here for maybe 10 years, 12 years. So some of them stay long, some of them don't, because it also depends on the employer, whether he wants to renew the work permit. It also depends on the worker, whether he wants to stay on here. and also depends on whether this person who is here is up to no good, is up to some mischief. And we have had occasions in the last couple of months, our guest workers who have broken the lockdown rules, who have been deported immediately.
And are these generally all young men, or are there families? What's the
Yeah,
situation for that?
yeah. The families are not here. They don't allow the families to come here. They don't allow them to marry here. So the families are all back home, and they are generally young people. So if you look at the fatality list, I think we have about 27, 28 people who have died. The foreign workers will be a very, very small number, mainly because they are young people, fit and healthy.
Hmm. And what might be the last question from me is so where does Singapore sit now in terms of its ability to contain COVID-19? I mean, since this explosion happened some weeks ago, you mentioned there's still several hundred per day, but does the government look like they're getting it under control slowly, or does it still look like they've got a long way to go?
Yeah, I think yeah, they have it under control. And last Friday, they eased the restrictions for a second time, which the major restriction is you can actually go out and dine, but restricted to 5 people, which was the first time after about 2.5 months. So they are becoming a bit more confident. And of course, some people say that is because an election is coming just around the corner. So they have to start uh, relaxing the rules. But it can cut both ways, right? When you relax the rules, as you have seen in many countries, when you relax the rules, the spike happens.
Hmm.
I think it has happened in America, in London, for example.
All right. And before we go to the off-the-record session with the SNA patrons, um, is there any question that I should have asked you either about the guest workers or about the COVID-19 crisis that you'd like to address?
Not really. I mean, I think you have asked all the questions. There's nothing that I've not answered. I mean, I think I've touched on all issues, but just one, and that's a bit more of a deep issue, and that is Singapore has, I think, an over dependence on foreign workers, and relating that to the economics, to the economy of Singapore. Is it sustainable? This large number of foreign workers, for how long can Singapore continue to depend on them? I
Mm.
think that's a fundamental question. Some people are asking that. And I think moving forward, Singapore has to look into this in a very big way. And the Singapore government is a bit cagey about talking about this, because in 2011 elections, that became a big issue, foreign workers, because the government did, it was a major misstep by the Singapore government by allowing in too many foreign workers. As a result, there was a transport crunch and there was a housing crunch, which got Singaporeans very upset, and they voted in a way which we have not seen in recent times, which brought the ruling party's majority to 60.1%. Of course, in many countries, that's a big thing, right? But in Singapore, is a big thing for the ruling party to have lost ground so much. So I think they are very, very cagey. They are very they don't want to talk too much about it, but they have to start uh, this problem. And it's a difficult problem to tackle, because our workers, and I'm speaking here in general terms, are not trained. One, they are not trained to do a lot of the work that some of these foreign workers do. Secondly, or guest workers. And secondly, the economy, the jobs that are coming in here are all very high skilled jobs. And the Singaporeans are not, and I'm speaking very generally here, are not trained for these jobs because these are very high skilled jobs. The foreign minister gave a statistic yesterday. He said we need 60,000 infocom workers in the next 3 years. And the graduates who are graduating from universities and the polytechnics, we are producing about 2,800 a year. You see the shortfall? The shortfall is high. So where are you going to fill this about 50,000 workers or 40,000 workers? Where are they going to come from? And can you then say, oh, we don't want these jobs? If you don't want these jobs, then the investors will go somewhere else. So they are really caught here, you see, in the sense that, generally speaking, again, that our workers are not skilled to take on a lot of these high-skilled jobs. That's the one point I thought I should add to the mix.
Well, it's a very good point. So, all right. Well, thank you very much. So now we will move on to the patron Q&A session.